Hey there, I'm Andrei, and in this Photoshop video I want to show you how to create color grading, HDR-ish tone effect, or whatever you want to call it. I want to show my technique of creating this kind of effect in Photoshop, and just to know what we are talking about, I will show the original image. Okay, so this is the original image, and I want to show you how to get this this kind of effect. I didn't use any external plugin or anything like that. I'm using Photoshop CS6, but you can do it in previous version of Photoshop because we didn't use any weird plugin, and maybe you can even do it in Photoshop Elements, I think. So you can try it if you want. So well, let's get started. So in order to get this effect, we will use a lot of adjustment layers, as you can see on my palette right here. And it's simply a combination of blend modes and adjustment layers. And I want you to keep in mind that this effect might not work the same for all images. So you might have to make variations to this adjustments that you have here. But you will learn how this works, and you get some ideas of how you can use these adjustments on your own images. So let's get started. I will also show you another this technique on another image, which is this one, and I used different adjustments here, but you can see it's pretty much the same technique, the same steps. It's almost identical. So the first thing I want to do is close this. We'll open it later, and the tutorial will be centered on this image, and I will show you how I made the other one, but not in as much detail as on this image. Okay, so what I will do is deactivate all layers. You can deactivate all layers if you press and hold the Alt key and click on the eye icon, and all the rest of the layers will be turned invisible. And if you want to turn them all on, again, you can do the same, press and hold the Alt key and click on the eye icon. So I disabled all the other layers. I'll select entire canvas with Control or Command A, and I go to Edit, Copy. I'll press Control Command N to paste this image here. This is an image from Deposit Photos. You'll have it on the stock folder, but you can use any image you want. Let's make it just a little smaller because I'm also recording the video. And just make sure, if you use a picture of your own, just make sure it has the contrast is more or less correct, so you don't have very bright images or very dark. The technique will not work very well. So just an image like this that has some shadows, midtones, and things like that. So if you have an image which is overexposed or too underexposed, try, if you should in RAW, try the camera raw and just bring in some details. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do in order to create this effect is create a duplicate of our layer just in case. So press Control Command J, and we will apply a filter to this copy. Let's name it light, because we will change the light on this, and this is one of the most important steps on this for this effect. So I will go to Image, Adjustments, and choose Shadows and Highlights. And this is a filter that it's available in previous versions of Photoshop. As I said, I'm using Photoshop CS6, and with this you can really change the aspect of your image. I use this filter a lot when I wrote an article for Photoshop Creative, and they were asking me to create an HDR effect, and in fact you can do that with this plugin. The photo, I don't know that filter, the name of that, let me take a look at it. The HDR toning, I don't really like how it works. I don't like it at all. So instead I use the shadows and highlights. So what we do here, you have to click the show more options, because otherwise you only have these two sliders here. So click show more options, and you'll have a few more sliders here. So we have like three sections here. Okay, we have the shadows with 3 sliders, the highlights also with 3 sliders, and then we have the adjustments. And what we do with these sliders, for example on the shadows, if you slide this to the right, what you do is start to add light on the shadows. You can see that here under the car. you can see that the shadows, the shaded area becomes brighter. Okay, and with the tonal width, you control. I don't know how to explain this, but you control how much this affects the shadow. Okay, and with the radius as well. Okay, so the higher the radius, I think the softer the effect. I think, I'm not sure, but I usually do this by eye. I don't really want to know what this do. I just take a look at the image and make the adjustments like that. Okay, or sometimes it's a good idea to set this to, if you don't want to add too much light on the shadow, use a smaller amount here, and then use a higher tonal width and a small radius. Let's leave it here for this image. You can see this area right here on the left. There's no detail here, so even though I set this to maximum, Photoshop is not able to add detail here because there's no detail. It's too underexposed. So if you have a raw image, you can work with Camera Raw and add more detail in Camera Raw, and then tweak, add the details from here, and just control the amount of light from the shadows and highlights filter here. And with the shadows, the same. If you set this on 0, it has no effect, and if you increase this, if you set it to the right, you start to add more shadow on the highlight. So you can see the image starts to lose detail on the highlights, so they become darker. So the same here with the tonal width. So you can start to see that it creates that sort of HDR effect. Okay, you can see that halo around the car right there, and you can control that with the radius. Maybe you can understand now a bit better how this radius work. Okay, so the higher the radius, the softer the effect, and the smaller radius, you can see those halos are more visible. And also here on top of this house or this building, whatever that is. So let's leave this somewhere about there. And with the color correction, what you do is increase the saturation, or if you decrease it to -100, you make the image a bit more even, so it somehow corrects the color. Okay, let's leave it there, -21. And with the midtone contrast, what you do is increase the contrast on the midtones. I don't like this kind of look. I want it softer. I can add contrast later, so I usually put it on negative, but well, this depends on what you like. So you don't have to do it like I do it. And let's see here on the shadows. So as I said, this is the most important step maybe. Let's leave it like that. Okay, I think I will leave it like that. By the way, if you turn this into a smart object, this adjustment that you make will become a smart adjustment or a smart filter, so you can come back and edit that. And I will not undo it because I don't know if the settings are saved, so I don't want to do it again. But keep in mind that if you use a smart object, this will become a smart adjustment. Okay. And once you have all of this set up, once you apply this filter or adjustment, it's just a matter of adding adjustment layers. And the first adjustment layer that I usually add is the selective color, because from here I can edit each color independently. And the settings that you add here are entirely up to you, depending on what tone you're looking for. You can see that on my image I went for sort of a blue tone, a blue cast, but you can turn it in, you can get any tone you want. So what you do here is select each channel, each color, sorry, not each channel. So for example, select the reds, and you have a few sliders here. So on the reds, which are mostly these areas here and part of the car, what you do is add more cyan on the reds and see how it only affects these colors here. Okay, and also a bit the car. You can see that it adds more cyan, so it only affects the reds. You can add more magenta, or you can, if you decrease, that's important, you need to know the opposite colors. I'll probably include the video where I talked about opposite colors on RGB, because the opposite of magenta is green. So if I put this on negative values, the image becomes green. See that? And if I set it to positive, it becomes magenta, of course. And on the cyan, the opposite of the cyan is red. So if I put negative on cyan, I get red. See, it becomes even more red. So let's leave it there. And the opposite of yellow is blue. And since I have magenta and blue, that gives me this tone. So it's a bit tricky if you don't know what you're doing. That's why you need to know a bit about colors. So let's leave it there on that cyan. A bit more of green and a bit more of yellow. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is the yellows. This will affect mostly the ground here, maybe this grass here, maybe also a bit this bushes or whatever these things are. So let's add a bit more cyan here as well. So if you don't see the effect, what I usually do when I don't see the effect that it has, I make big changes like that, so I can see what part of the image changes, and that way I can adjust that. Let's leave it. Remember that the opposite of magenta is green, so if I want to make this even more greener, I can set negative values here on the magenta. On the yellows, I want to have the blue tone, so I'll slide this to the negatives on the yellows. And with the black, what you do is adjust the brightness of that color, in this case the yellows. So if I want the yellows to be brighter, I slide this to the left, okay, and you can see it becomes brighter. And if I want to make them darker, I can slide this to the right. I don't remember the adjustments that I used on the original, but I'm just trying to explain how this adjustment works and hopefully get a nice result. The greens, you can see, is not having too much effect because these are actually also almost yellow, so we don't have too much effect. And also we are trying to add more cyan to the green, which is not really visible. So this is not going to work too well for us. Let's go to the cyans, which is the sky. With the cyans, what we can do here, we can make this the sky darker. You can see if I set it to 100, sorry, the sky becomes darker. And I want to make it to add a bit more blue, so I slide this to negative on the yellows, and maybe a bit of magenta, not too much, and a bit of cyan. And the blues will affect it even more. Okay, so let's do that, something like that, and darker. It has too much magenta, it starts to have a purple tone, so I'll decrease the magentas, maybe increase the cyans, and go to the cyans and do the same. Increase the cyan and decrease the magenta a bit. Okay, after that I'll show you how the before and after. And we don't have any magentas on the image, so if we change this, nothing will happen because there's no magentas on the original image. These ones, you should be very careful with these ones, with the whites, neutrals, and blacks. If I choose neutrals, which is most of the images except the highlights, which are these clouds and the shadows, I can add color casts to this. So if I want to make the neutrals darker, I can slide this like that, but I don't want to do that because I can use levels or another adjustment to do that. But I can add color, as I said. If I slide this to the left, the yellows, you can see how it adds a bit more blue, but I don't really like that tone. It's almost magenta, so I can compensate that with the cyan and the red. So I slide this to the right, and you can see it starts to look a bit more blue. On the blacks, which is the shadows right here, I can add blue there. Okay, so you can see the effect, and you can see it only affects the dark parts of the image, the shadows here. All of the rest of the image is not, it's untouched. Okay, so you should be very careful with the adjustments here, because you can really destroy your image, so be careful with that. Okay, let's move on with the next adjustment. I used curves, and with the curves you can add, you can work with the channel. So if you're on RGB, you will only adjust the contrast, okay? So you know how to use the curves. But if you go into each channel, you can adjust. For example, on the blues, we have the shadows here and the highlights right here. So if I want to add more blue on the shadows, what I can do is click on this point and drag it up. But you can see it affects the whole image, not just the shadows, because you can see that this was the original line and now the adjustment is above that, so it affects the shadows more than the other image, but in a linear way, because that's why this line we have here. But I can add a point here and drag it down, and you can see that we start to get that kind of split tone effect, okay? And the same with the other ones. For example, for the reds, if you want to add more, remember the opposite of red is cyan. So if I want to add cyan, I can click on this point and drag it to the right. If I drag it up, I add more red on the shadows. And if you want to touch the highlights, the same. Click here and drag to the left or to the right. Of course, you can add points. You don't necessarily have to move these points, okay? So I'll just do something like that and leave it as it is. I forgot to show the before and after. So this was after applying the selective color. Okay, so you can see it's a big change. And this is after applying the curves. We added even more blue. Maybe it's even too much. Let's decrease the opacity a bit here. The next thing that I added is a gradient map. For color grading, gradient map, it's really cool because I also have a video about how the gradient map works. I'll make a quick explanation here. So we have this linear gradient here, and you can see what it does to the image. What I'll do is reverse it because you'll see it better. So what we have here is this dark color. Let's change it. Let's use, for example, a blue color like this. And for this one, we will change it to this color. And in fact, I will not reverse it because forget what I did. I'll do it again. So because I don't want you to be confused about this. Just be patient. I'll explain it right now. Okay, so we have this gradient, right? And if you open it, you can see here on the left side we have this blue color. And on the right side, we have this yellow, unsaturated yellow color. Okay, this bright yellow. What the gradient map does is on the left here, we have the shadows. And on the right, we have the highlights. And what it does is it takes the shadow value right here. So it identifies all the shadows that have this value here, which if you're 100% on the left, it's pure black. So it gets the blacks and adds this color, and then it just goes through this gradient, and it assigns to each grayscale, because this is just a grayscale, it assigns a color to the entire image until it reaches the highlights, which is this clouds here, and it to the clouds, to the highlights, it assigns this color. If you add another point here, which is the midtones, if we use this orange, for example, it gets the midtones, and it assigns this color that we have, and it gradually turns into this other color when it reaches the highlights there. So I hope it was not too confusing. As I said, I have a tutorial on YouTube. I'll add a link maybe to that video so you can see it. So once you have the gradient, what you can do is change the blend modes. Soft light and overlay usually increases the contrast. See that? It increases the contrast, so the difference between blacks and whites. But what I did, as I said, is to luminosity, and see the effect. It made the image even softer. Maybe it's even too soft I don't know how to washed maybe. So what I will do is probably use a darker tone here, or just decrease the opacity of the layer. Either thing will do. Let's leave it at 30. It's too low. Let's leave it at about 50. And maybe leave this color a bit more saturated and a bit brighter. You can try other tones here, but the reason why I use this is again because these complement each other because they are opposite colors, blue and yellow. So that's why this kind of colors always look good. For example, this one is a gradient, and it always looks good because purple and orange are opposite colors on the RGB mode. So that's why most people just get that gradient here and put that there and change this to screen, and you get this sort of vintage old look effect. Okay, let's turn this. I don't know why I changed the gradient. Okay, let's leave that there, and let's move on and add even more effects, even more adjustments. The next adjustment that I used for this particular image was the black and white. And again, the reason why I use this adjustment is because I have control over each color independently. So for the reds, I can make them brighter. See that? Or I can make them darker, like that. And the same for the yellows. So you can do, you can affect each color separately, and that's why I like it. So see that you can create really nice black and white images with this adjustment. It's a lot better than just using the hue saturation and desaturating the image. But I didn't want to use this black and white to turn the image into black and white. That was useless for me. What I wanted is to have this capability of changing the brightness of each color and combine that with a blend mode. And for this image, I used the Lighten blend mode. Let's see if I can find it. Lighten right here. And see how I can change the luminosity of the reds, for example. The same for the yellows. The greens, well, this bush is right here. Or the sky. I can make it brighter, I can make it darker. Okay. And let's expand this because we also have the magentas right here. But I changed the opacity to about 30%. So make sure you first change the blend mode. So have the blend mode that you want and then make the changes, because for example, if I change this to soft light, it will not look that good. But well, it still looks nice. Let's leave it on light and how it was. Now these values here, I don't have, these are not the same values as on the original, but you can see that we're starting to get a similar result. So see the magentas right here, and let's leave that like that. Okay, and on top of everything, if you want to control the saturation, you can add a hue saturation or a vibrance adjustment and just increase the saturation or change the hue a bit, just a bit, 3 or 4, not more, because it will start to look weird. Or if you want to affect colors independently, you can use the selective colors here to make selective color changes. Again, I have a tutorial about this on YouTube. Just look for hue saturation or adjustments, selective color changes or something like that, and you'll find it. Okay. I didn't change too much the image with this adjustment. I don't want to make it too saturated because I don't really like those oversaturated images. And then after making all these changes and things, you can add as many as you want. You will start to just make different effects. I added a selective color again on top of everything, because once I have everything ready, I wanted to be able to again change the colors on the image. This time will not have as much effect as before, so you have to make big changes like that and see which area of the image changes. Let's try with the yellows. Remember that what we do with this is change the color balance, so to say, on each color, but it's not having too much effect. I don't know why, but on the original, you can open the original PSD file and take a look at that. It's not having too much effect. You can use the neutrals. The neutrals, these ones, the 3 ones on the bottom will always have a big effect on your images when you change the settings. Okay, so maybe add some more blue and cyan right there, and on the yellows, on the neutrals I added too much yellow. Okay, something like that. And to finish, what I did is I created a stamp with Shift, Control, Alt, and E, and that creates a stamp of all of what you see here on the image. It flattens all the layers onto a new layer. And what I did is I went to, this time I didn't use an adjustment layer, I just went here to adjustments, black and white, and I think I used a preset from here. Let's see which one. Yeah, let's try this one. It's really contrasty. Again, of course, I used it with blend mode, not like this. Okay, let's leave it like that, and we can change it after that. And I changed the blend mode of this to I think it was luminosity, yes, and change the blend mode. Try reducing the opacity a bit and see the effect. We get a bit more contrast. It's too much for this image, so what you can do is use levels to adjust the contrast of that. Okay, so you can also change the levels of the outputs. Okay, so set the threshold of black and white, and this is the effect that we get. Just a bit more brightness here on the highlights, and I changed just a bit more brightness and a bit more contrast and a bit more light here. So okay, so that's how I got this. Let me show you the original. So from that to this, I don't know if it's your it depends on your taste, so maybe some people don't like this effect, but I showed you how to do it. You can add more, you can have more contrast, more high contrast images if you want to, but this is what I did. You can try it for yourself and try other effects and maybe a bit more contrast. Okay, this is my original result. It looks a bit better in my opinion. So just open the PSD file, and I just show you the process, but you can get the values from each adjustment here, and you can create an action if you want, but I don't know if it will work on all images. Just start recording the action and start make the adjustments, and when you're done, just stop the action and try applying that action on another image. Let me open now the other image that I talked about, which was this one, and let me show the original. Okay, so this was the original, and this was the before and after. The effect here is not as dramatic as on the other one, but it still looks quite good. You can see the tone of blue that we have here, which is only visible on this kind of yellow that we have on this part, so that's cool. And I follow the same process. You can see I created a duplicate, and this time I use an adjustment, a smart object. Sorry. So I use the smart object this time, and you can see the shadows and highlights, the effect that it has. It brightens up the image, it increases the range, the dynamic range of the image, I think. And after that I started to add adjustments. This levels adjustment has no effect. I think I didn't edit it. No, let's delete it. Then the first adjustment that I really used was the color balance. The color balance is also really good to create this kind of color grading effects. On the previous image I didn't use it, but you can use it because you can control shadows, midtones, and highlights, and really give the tone that you want to your image. Okay, so I used this one, then I used curves, and I used the same technique. I went on the blues, and you can see I left the midtones where they were. I added just a bit of yellow, because if you drag this point below the original line, you add yellow. And I dragged this up to add more blue on the shadows. Okay, let's leave that there. And I think I didn't make any other changes here. I left this ones how they were, but on the RGB this was too dark, so I added a point here and dragged this up a bit just to add more light. Then I added a selective color again to change the aspect here. You can see I wanted to have that to preserve that orange tone, so I left the reds here because without it this was a bit I didn't really like it, so I added more reds here. And you can see you can really change the tone. You can have more yellow if you want, or make it darker or brighter. So it's just a matter of spending a bit of time and just analyzing your image a bit. And here on the neutrals I added a bit more yellow and a bit more magenta and a bit more cyan as well. And then I added a photo filter just to give it an orange look, and I used it on soft light to just get a bit more contrast because it was too washed, the image. See that part here? After adding this little pebbles here are a lot more visible, and also here on the shadow it looks a bit better. And then I used the color fill to I don't know why I added this actually, because I'm undoing what I'm doing with this, so I get pretty much the same result, so I don't know why I did it. I use that exclusion technique. It's just using a dark tone and set the exclusion mode, and what it does, it inverts the image, but since I'm using a really dark tone only, the effect is really almost invisible. Well, it reduces the contrast a bit and inverts the image slightly. And then I use the hue saturation to increase the saturation of the image. And then I don't know what I did here. I think I created a stamp, and then I went to image adjustments and choose no, I don't know what I did here. I just created this bright blue tone. Okay, I don't know how I did this. Well, anyway, just get your image to look like that. And then I used the luminosity blend mode at 17%. Okay, so if you want to change the tone, use hue saturation and just use another tone, but well, it doesn't have too much effect on the image. And then I used curves to increase the contrast on the whole image, and maybe it's too strong contrast. And again, the original and the edited image. Basically, I added a bit more blue on the shadows, right? So the tones that look best on this kind of color grading are the opposite colors. So if you try to mix, for example, magenta with yellow, it's probably not looking good. But anyway, it's just a matter of trying, because you never know. So, well, that was the color grading technique that I use. I hope you liked this tutorial, and well, if you did, just remember that on my YouTube account I have a lot of videos that where I talked about adjustments like this one. So if you want to ask something, first try and search on my YouTube channel. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.